everybody, and welcome once again to the Real Comics Podcast. I'm your host, Felipe, better known as Voodoo57. Along with me, as always, is my good friend, Andrew, better known as Speedy G33. Andrew, how are you doing today, this fine October morning?
What's up?
All right, are you ready to get into some tricks and treats?
Yes, and don't give me rocks.
No rocks. You're not Charlie Brown. I got a rock. All right, everybody, welcome. Like I said, this is our special October event. Welcome to part 1 in this series. Today, we are going to discuss Hellboy 1. But before we do, let's give you a quick background on how we run our show. We're going to give you a quick take after I talk a little bit about the actors and the description of the film. And then we're going to get into some spoilers. We're going to get heavy into the background of what we learned. Now, this is an older film. We're focusing on the darker side of comic book films. So we're glad you're joining us for this one. And Andrew, what do you say we get into this guy real quick?
Let's get into some Hellboy.
Welcome to the Bureau for Paranormal Research and Defense. There are things that go bump in the night, Agent Myers.
All right. In the final days of World War II, the Nazis attempt to use black magic to aid their dying cause. The Allies raid the camp where the ceremony is to take place, but not before a demon, Hellboy, has already been conjured. Joining the Allied forces, Hellboy eventually grows into adulthood, serving the cause of good rather than evil. The movie is directed by Guillermo del Toro and stars Ron Perlman as Hellboy, John Hurt as Professor Broom, Rupert Evans as Meyer, Selma Blair as Liz, and Jeffrey Tambor as Tom Manning. Andrew, what did you think? What are your initial impressions when you saw Hellboy?
When I actually saw Hellboy at the theater, my initial impressions, I was in love with it because Hellboy came out at a time that we weren't getting all these comic book movies we're getting now. So it was awesome to get a comic book movie, and it was really cool. I didn't know a lot about Guillermo del Toro at the time. So to see the world and the visions that he creates, it was amazing. It blew me away to see the original Hellboy. Yeah.
No, I'm completely agree with you. The characters and the fantasy world that is created from this comic book are pretty amazing. I was astounded. I didn't know that there were, and me being me, it's more about film than it is the comics. I didn't know there was a comic originally. And I went straight for the comic after the movie. Yeah. So I do have one Hellboy comic, which was prior to movie. So I have just a small, tiny bit of background on it. I definitely enjoyed everything about it from the first to the third act. I thought it opened well. I thought our villain was good. He was a stuntman who wielded swords. There's definitely a lot to like in this. A lot of action. And, of course, the character of Hellboy himself is really enjoyable because he's a smartass who, there's no secret here. He loves cats and cigars and drinking beer. And that's an awesome and fun thing in a movie.
Yeah, well, he's a blue-collar guy. No matter how you look at it, he's a blue-collar guy. He may be a monster who hunts monsters, who works for this really secret organization, but he approaches it just like a guy doing construction. You know what I mean? It's his job. He checks in, he does his job, and then he goes home, he drinks a beer, and hangs out with his cats. He's very chill, watches a movie or TV. Yeah, and, of course, I watched it again to get ready for this, and it still holds up. It's one of those movies that holds up. A lot of those older hero movies don't, but Hellboy does. And
I would agree with you there. Yeah, for sure. It's one of those when it comes on TV, wherever it's at, you finish watching it.
Oh yeah.
Whether it's early in the beginning or towards the end, you don't care. You finish watching it. Hey, quick fun fact while you were on the story of the blue collar that Hellboy is. I found out in my little research here, as I always do, that it's actually the character of Hellboy is based on Mike Mignola's father.
Yeah, that's true. He did base a lot on his father.
Yeah.
His father was a cabinet maker, and he said, his dad would just come home exhausted every night and just kind of sit there and drink a beer and just a regular, like a tough guy. He's like, on the extended edition the special edition for the Hellboy one, he talks about that in an interview, how his dad would come home with gashes in his hands and telling these stories how, yeah, I had to pull some nails out of my hands and stuff like that. It's like his dad was like a total old school, tough, hardworking guy, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Hey, and since we're talking about Mignola, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the comic real fast about.
Yeah, let's get into the quick history of the comic.
You know, he had been writing, I had been drawing predominantly for some different companies when he came up with the Hellboy concept. And the funny thing is he came up with it for a comic for the San Diego Comic Con. They used to put out a comic. It was called the San Diego Comic Con comic. That was for the Comic Con. And he drew a piece of art for it. And he just wanted to draw something with like a monster. And I've seen the original picture. It looks very different from this Hellboy. And he had a big buckle on it. And he goes, I need something in that buckle. So he just penciled in Hellboy. And so that's kind of how Hellboy kind of grew. And when he started thinking about doing his own comic, people told him, just do what you love. Do what you love. And the guy loves monsters. He loves like the arcane arts and the history of the arcane arts and all that kind of supernatural stuff. So it was a marriage put together. He made Hellboy, and he kind of explored all these old archaic kind of artistic histories. And it's been a successful comic. It's a unique comic if you look at Hellboy. You won't mix it up with anything else. It's a really good book. It's pretty much the only thing he's been super successful with, but you know, it's turned into movies and everything else. So
yeah, I mean, that's just all amazing stuff there. I found much of the same things, and I think that's very interesting. Andrew, what do you think about Guillermo del Toro's vision and what he brings to the table for Hellboy 1?
See, and that's why Hellboy works. Is because Guillermo del Toro loved the comic book. He read the comic book, he saw the art, and it just sparked in him, and he's a very creative guy too. And then him and Mignola, when they met, they became friends, and it became a partnership. They worked with each other. Even though del Toro changed a lot of things, he changed them with Mignola's blessing. And Mignola talks about, yeah, I wouldn't have thought of that, but yeah, it works. Or I wouldn't have thought of that. And how Guillermo maybe expanded things. But Guillermo also loves monsters. He loves fantasy. And he was really intrigued by the Gothic look of the book. And he wanted to make a movie that had that Gothic look.
Yeah, I love everything about this movie. And that's one of the reasons, the look of it, the characters from, character A all the way down to character Z, whether that was the creatures in the background or whether they were up front or whether it was the characters involved around him, the way that they worked. Like Abe or any of those other characters, they were pretty amazing and they did a great job. I did learn one little fun fact here as well, that when Mignola and del Toro were together and they thought, well, who's going to play Hellboy? They both said just about at the same time, Ron Perlman. So yeah. Speak a little bit about that. I know you told me some stuff earlier.
Yeah, definitely. Perlman was always on their mind before they even had written the script. So Guillermo del Toro, when he wrote the script, was writing it for Ron Perlman. He basically called Ron up and said, I'm writing you a movie. And on the effects end, again, on that special edition, I watched when they started to sculpt what Hellboy was going to look like, the company they went with that was going to do the makeup effects happened to have a bust already of Perlman from Beauty and the Beast, the TV show Beauty and the Beast that he did. And so they started working with that. And that's how they started coming up with the actual thing. And it ended up backfiring on him a little bit because Ron had aged a little bit and his face was a little different. And del Toro wanted it to look like the bust. And it's like, well, his face doesn't exactly look like that anymore. So it became more of a challenge. They had to do some alterations and different things to kind of get it just right. But yeah, it was always about him because, like you said, that blue collar guy, and Ron Perlman is truly like a blue collar guy. So it's pretty neat.
Yeah. He's played that particular character in several other films. And he's really good at that kind of, right in your face, forward thinker, not holding anything back. And I do like that part about Ron Perlman. Hey, let's round out our non-spoiler section by talking a little bit about the look of the film, the practical effects and the Gothic horror nature of it. A lot of that stuff there was very little CGI from what I understand. Andrew,
There was
what
some,
can you
but
say?
not to the level that we're used to. I mean, a lot was practical. And you know what's really cool is Hellboy came out in 2004 and Pan's Labyrinth came out in 2006. So this was almost a test run, for Guillermo. So what he learned here, he took, and then we get the masterpiece that's Pan's Labyrinth. And you can see some similarities in the two of them. But yeah, to go to you, they makeup, they built suits, they put stuntmen on all kinds of ropes and wire work, and they tried very hard to do most of the effects practical.
Yeah.
And there was some things they had to do CGI, like when the guy flips at the beginning, there's a guy that flips into that kind of thing to go into the other dimension, just a scientist or whatever. A big chunk of that is CGI because they couldn't get the wires to roll right to make it look realistic. But things like that. But for the most part, they put people in costumes and they flipped cars in real life. They did all kinds of neat things. And then there was some, and then they layered it all in post. You know what I mean? Clean plates, and then you start layering things. But it shows. It really feels real.
Yep. As the film guy, I'll take practical over anything, over CGI as much as possible, to where it's not dumbed down. It's a small miniature model that you can clearly see in nowadays, but nobody rarely uses that kind of stuff. Where and a good example is the Disney and Lucasfilm have learned from those three prequels in Star Wars. You go back to the practical effects. You stay with them. And I love that they used them early on. And we'll talk about it more in part 2. But for Hellboy 1, it looked amazing. Everything did look real. Like it could pop right out at the screen and get you at any moment.
And Del Toro, he's just such a stickler for detail. The guy has a vision in his head. I mean, that dude's a creative genius. There's no doubt about it. I mean, you can complain like he takes too long to get his films done and he's working on 15 projects at the same time. He's obviously got some ADHD going on or something, but he's just a creative. I mean, the things that he sees, and he makes sure this film looks beautiful. And it's a beautiful film. And that's all due to him. The Gothic, the dark look, it's gritty. You feel like you're in a new world, a different world, something that we hadn't really seen before. Some other movies tried but hadn't hit it, like maybe The Crow, maybe Spawn, and some other things like that. But they hadn't got, and I mean, even Burton's Batman to a degree, but he really hit it. Yeah.
I would agree with you to some points on there for sure. Definitely. All right. Let's call that our non-spoiler section. What do you say?
Sounds good.
All right, let's move on to our spoiler section. We're going to get a little bit deeper into the film, discuss more about the characters, the plots, and the things that we directly like from the film at this time. So you've been warned. If for some reason you haven't seen this movie, spoilers are ahead. All right, Andrew, we are back, and we're going to talk about spoilers. But before we get into the big spoiler part of that, let's talk a little bit about your thoughts on the characters themselves. We're talking Hellboy, Professor Broom, Liz, and especially Abe Sapien, and Rupert Evans, who has a part to play in this and in his character.
An important part, actually.
An important part.
Real quick with Hellboy, I just kind of give like a quick what powers he has in the comic, so you kind of know what kind of character we're dealing with. He has a healing factor, something similar to, say, Deadpool or Wolverine. So even though he's injured, it heals himself. He has strength. He has the power of necromancy. So he can bring, like in this movie, he brings someone back from the dead to help him. He understands the magic and speaks all these arcane magic languages. So he's a nice mixture. Plus, he's just strong. He's a really strong physical character, and he has that big stone fist that he can really kick your butt with. So he's a pretty powerful character.
Part of that background I learned was where his birth came from. He was his mother was a witch or a demon agent, and she was really only 16. But she spoke to the Lord of Witches, who placed Hellboy in her soul that very night. And so he is actually part witch, and that's where a lot of his powers come from.
Yeah, and see, he's a bad guy. I mean, well, he's not a bad guy, but he's a monster. He's legitimately a monster that was destined to do bad things, but because when he was a little small child, I guess you would call it a child, he came to Earth,
Right.
and Broom, who we're going to get into, raises him to be like a human. So his whole thing is, even though he's this monster, he feels like he's a human,
Right.
you know? And so he doesn't act like a monster, even though he is one. And that's kind of his balance of the story, especially as the story gets a little farther on, is that he has to like come to realizations of what he really is and understand.
Right. And that's one of the things I love is the relationships that they do have in here. Clearly, Professor Broom plays his surrogate father and is there for, he is the conscious, he is the level, he is the one that keeps him on par when he gets agitated. And clearly something that we definitely want to talk about in this movie is, first part of it is they're a secret society. They're a secret society, and he has a hard time coming to grips with the fact that why can't he be out in the open like everybody else? Mm-hmm. Why can't he walk down to the street and grab a 6-pack of beer and drink it? Why can't he go grab a pizza like a normal person?
Because he feels like a normal person, and right. You know, he files down his horns to look more normal and things like that. And yeah, you know, he has that moment with Liz in the movie where he goes, this. You know, he's talking about how he can't do anything about the way he looks. That's right. Who he is. But inside, he's not that person. And yeah, and Bloom is the one who made him feel that way. And you say secret society. This movie opens with that fun story that always goes around. It's in Indiana Jones about right. the Nazis being in, and Hitler wanting to collect all these different mystical artifacts and being right. into that. So the organization that Bloom works for is like our response to that. We make our own version to fight off the Nazis. Right. And yeah, I love Bloom, and his role was expanded. It's very minor in the comics, but right. This was one of Del Toro's things. He wanted that father figure to show how Hellboy becomes who Hellboy is. And then it's John Hurt. I mean, man, you can't go wrong with that.
Yeah, the great and powerful John Hurt. He was an amazing actor in his own right. We could go on about the things he did, but you know, we don't want to go crazy. Let's talk a little bit about Abe and Liz. Okay, tell me a little bit about Abe Sapien and Liz. Okay, of course, and their characters and how you felt about them being portrayed here in this movie.
I really like Liz. Liz is also expanded from the comics. She's has a minor role. She's not a romantic interest of Hellboy's. Again, Del Toro, because Del Toro loves a love story.
He loves a romance.
He wants to put that in his movie, so he created that as a romantic interest. And because there's not a lot about her in the comic, they were able to make her how they wanted to make her. And I really enjoyed her, even though she's the most normal looking. She's actually the one that's the least comfortable with who she is, which is kind of interesting. The two weird looking ones are comfortable with who they are. They're just like, hey, regular guys. They go out and they do their missions and they do their things and they enjoy their lives, where she is like a mess. She has to actually go, and she looks the most normal, which is kind of interesting.
You touched on another thing that I love very much, is you're absolutely right. Liz was the outsider in this group, the most human and normal looking one, even though she does have a power. She couldn't handle it. She didn't know how to deal with it, and she struggles with it throughout this movie. She really does. But you know, obviously, when she gets with the rest of the group, she learns to temper it, control it. You know, however you want to put it. But yeah, definitely. And then let's talk about Abe Sapien.
Oh, Abe's awesome. And what's interesting about Abe is you have two people in essence playing it. You have the actor,
Doug Jones,
who's like portraying it. He's in the makeup and the whole works. And then the voice was done by David Hyde Pierce. Why they made that choice, I don't exactly know. I couldn't find a lot of info on that. But he's obviously a great actor. The accent, he's funny. I'm a real big fan of the way Abe looks. He's awesome looking. And what I really liked is he's in the water, and then when he's out of the water, all the gadgets he has to wear, you know, like those little tubes so he can still breathe, and just all that gear and his little shades or his little goggles and stuff. And it really made me believe that he was an aquatic creature, which sometimes fails. Like I just watched Inhumans, for example, and one of them is supposed to be aquatic and it doesn't look aquatic. And I know I hate to throw that, but it's an example to me that a lot of these TV shows and movies fail to show an aquatic creature in a way. And it's just they didn't have to put him in the water the whole show. They came up with a way to let me believe that he still needs the water to survive.
Right.
Then shoot a scene like the scene when he's down there looking for those monsters and the eggs.
Yeah.
Where it's awesome. It's great visuals.
So real quickly, can you give me one of besides that scene? Give me a scene that you really enjoyed before we move on to the villains. That the heroes accomplished a goal, or the heroes were involved, or they're learning something about each other. What's a moment that sticks out in your head?
When they're chasing Samael, he breaks out of the window on the museum, and Hellboy follows him out of the window, and they run over the semi trucks. And they fighting in the streets, and he hits that car and it flips over, all that stuff. That was awesome. That was such a great action sequence. I mean, I was sold. That was like, right. I'm in this. Let's go. I
definitely agree with you there. I also enjoyed very much. We're gonna talk a little bit about the group of villains here shortly, but our villain was a sword wielder, a steampunk, steam driven villain. Mm-hmm. Brought back to life by the Nazis, and the sword play with him in it was just amazing. There's a scene in the museum where he's just wielding the swords and just shooting bullets off that are being fired at him and just blocking them at ease. That was one of my favorite moments. And then, of course, the battle scenes between him and Hellboy were spot on. So definitely awesome. All right, so we're getting down to the nitty gritty here. Let's talk a little bit about our villains, okay? We have Grigory Rasputin and Ilsa Hupsthausen and Karel Rupert Koren, who plays the sword-wielding Nazi. What did you think of the villains that were used in the first Hellboy here?
Wow, they were really good. Like you said, the Nazi-wielding one is my favorite, and then Samael, the creature that we have throughout the movie that spawns. Grigory just kind of furthered the plot more than was, you didn't feel him as being this scary villain, but he's there to further the plot and explain and all that thing. And his partner, Ilsa, she's just there. To say it, she's just there. But going back to, God, I need to remember his name. What is the robot guy's name? It'll come to me in a sec. But anyway, he is a minor character in the comics. He's very different. He's almost like Zola in the second Captain America. He's a brilliant scientist, and basically not all his body is still there. And he's trying to create something where he can transform into another form so he can live on. So he's a brilliant Nazi scientist, just like Zola, where he's not this assassin machine. That's another Del Toro creation.
Right. That's Karel Rupert Cronin.
That's right. Yeah.
So that was definitely a highlight as far as the villain side of it. I think you've hit the major points. You're right. Ilsa was kind of just let's do it kind of person. Let's do it. Let's put the world at risk kind of thing. Gregory, you know what? I think I agree with you a little, but I do want to say that his character Rasputin's character does become important in this fashion, and it's from a film sense, is that he gives us he tells Hellboy what his future is regardless of what he does. Yeah. And I think that you're right that the villain is kind of he moves the plot along, but he's also giving us the future. Mm-hmm. That no matter what he does, no matter how he shaves the horns off of his head, he has a destiny, and he's going to end up fulfilling it. And I think that's kind of at least that point of it is kind of important.
Yeah, I like that. And he's pretty comic accurate. That's how he is. That's really how he is. Another funny thing, because we're going into it, he talks a lot about, and he mentions it once in the movie, about Ragnarok. Yes. His goal is Ragnarok. And Ragnarok, he says it more in the comic about bringing the serpent. That's what he's trying to do. He's trying to bring the serpent through to destroy the world and remake it. Very similar to what we're going to get in Thor, which is Ragnarok bringing the serpent, and it's going to destroy the Norse gods and rebirth the world, in essence. So it was kind of cool to see those references at a time when we're getting ready to see a movie that's going to focus on Ragnarok.
That was definitely awesome. Okay, let's talk about the creatures, the monsters. We've talked a little bit about the practical use of them and how they are in this film. I thought they were amazing, especially the sound. That once you got rid of one, it really became two more. Well, how did you feel about how the use of monsters in Del Toro's world here in Hellboy?
That was awesome. They were the perfect things for Hellboy to just beat on, because he can't beat on Gregory because that's not the essence of what that character is. So you can't have action scenes with it. So you have these monsters that he can beat on and he can win, but you're right. They come back, or they come back 2s or 3s. So he's constantly having to fight them. And they looked so great. Like we said, it's practical effects. They look great in the water. They looked really frightening in the water. When Abe's down there in the water trying to get away from them, that was pretty, solid frights for a comic book movie. And then the end. How do you like the big creature at the end? The big kind of tentacle, almost like anime style creature that we get at the end.
It's a common use, and I'm glad you asked me that question. I remember thinking that when I first saw it in the theater, I was like, wow, is this like one of those anime tentacle creature? Literally, you just took the words out of my mouth. But the way they used it and the way that and how it ended in that scene, I thought it was fine. I didn't overthink it. I mean, I know that thought came into my head, but I didn't overthink it. I thought it was perfectly placed, and I thought it worked well with the world that they created. I thought that was pretty awesome. That was great. Yeah,
I agree. And it's hard. It's hard to do, like, you're going to do this all-powerful creature. Like, how do you depict that on film? It's easy to depict that in a comic. It's easy to depict that in a book where you don't have to draw it. But when you actually have to make something that moves and interacts with the world and does all that stuff, and it's supposed to be, it's really hard. I think a lot of movies have that problem, coming through with that. So we'll see how he does. Like, for example, Pacific Rim, he did that too. And I'm not so sure his villain kind of hit it on that. Or his big monster, his big bad guy monster.
No, I don't know. Those kaijus, that's a whole other podcast, my friend. That's a whole other podcast. Anyway, all right, so we've talked about our heroes, the villains, and the monsters. Let's finish up part 1, talking a little bit about the critical reception that it got. Now, it didn't do well in theaters, but I can tell you that it did get 81% tomato and 65% popcorn on the Flickster rating. So what did you think? How did it fare? Where do you put it?
You know what? It made money. It made more than they spent. So they made a profit on it, and it was popular enough, especially later in the DVD market, that it greenlit Hellboy 2.
Right.
So from that point of view, it did what it was supposed to do. It was nominated for 4 Saturn Awards, which are the awards for fantasy type shows and movies and TV shows, and it won one for makeup. So the all that great makeup, all those suits and everything paid off big time with an award. So I think it was one of the better films that came out in that era for comic book movies. And to this day, people still love it. People want another one, you know what I mean? And they think Guillermo del Toro, they think Ron Perlman when they think Hellboy. So, success.
So now, with all that said, and I agree, I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. I was a little nervous that the world would throw me off since I didn't know anything about it, but it was easy to dive right in. So I think we've both kind of said that it was really enjoyable. We've hit all its marks that we needed to enjoy a film and let people know that we liked it. But now, what is the process? What do we do? Where do we go from this point? What are your thoughts on what they were thinking about as far as getting ready for the next Hellboy movie?
Well, one big thing that happened going from 1 to 2 is they did change studios. Universal was the studio that dealt with number 2. Where number 1, it was distribution rights to some different people. I think Sony had it in the United States, Columbia had it worldwide. But 2, they go into Universal. And so there's someone else in charge. And that's where I think things get a little different when we get into the next one.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. So I can definitely tell you, as a Tricks and Treat Part 1, this is definitely a recommend from me, Felipe. Andrew?
Oh yeah, definitely. If you haven't seen it, you should. It just left Netflix, or I would say grab it on Netflix. It literally just left Netflix.
Right.
And if you do have a chance, there is a director's cut out there that I haven't seen yet that has more footage. I didn't know that. I have the special edition on DVD, not Blu-ray because it's so old. I have the special edition on DVD. It's a 2-disc special edition, but I guess they have a director's cut or extended cut. I'm not sure it's director or extended, but it has the same extra stuff and more extra stuff. And oh yeah, I got to get a hold of that. That's on my to buy list now.
Awesome, for sure. All right. So, Andrew, before we wrap this up, I have one last fun fact. I just love to throw out these little fun facts. Did you know that Hellboy has a favorite superhero? And do you know who that is?
Superman?
It is not Superman.
No, I didn't know this.
His favorite superhero is the Lobster, scourge of New York mobsters and Nazis all over the world.
All righty then.
There are several comics that I found where he's actually reading a comic, and the comic that he is reading is The Lobster.
Oh, that's funny. And you know what? Sorry, Logan, you weren't the first. When I resaw that, I forgot. There's a joke about how they're not done well. He says, "Nah, those stupid things." So Logan, you're not the first one to like dog your comics like Logan does the X-Men comics in his new movie. So
Hellboy, that's right. You are not.
Nothing's original. It's all been done before.
All right, Andrew. Any last comments or thoughts on Hellboy 1?
No, sounds great to me. We'll move on to number 2.
That's right. We're going to get ready for number 2. We hope you've enjoyed the kickoff to our October special Tricks and Treats. This was part 1, Hellboy 1, but join us for part 2, Hellboy 2, The Golden Army. Thanks for joining us on the Real Comics Podcast. I'm Felipe with Andrew.
Peace.
We'll see you on the flip side for part 2. And as always, be your own hero.